my experience of what I was happening for me in my life, in my relationship to friends or to family or other people.
Why does this always come out in this one relationship? Why are people not being able to diagnose this outside a romantic relationship?
Unhealthy relationship dynamics, because we all generally have inherited really rubbish ways of doing relationships.
Welcome back to the Creating Kinder Content podcast today with me, Mallika Bajaj. I'm inviting you to just imagine micro minutes and just leave it at that because it's not a great minute to imagine. Finding your Prince Charming, and I'm speaking as a woman, roles can be reversed straight out of your favorite novel or your movie. You're all set to embark on this fairy tale happily ever after, and just in the whole spontaneity of bringing together the shenanigans and the celebrations, the mask comes off. Dreams are shattered, and only you, for some godforsaken reason, have no idea what's going on because everybody else seems to think he's perfect. The mask is still up there in public, but it is in the closeness and the coming together of home with this person that you're building your life with or think you're going to be building your life with, that you find yourself lost, lonely, unheard, unseen, unvalidated because you're wired differently. Plot twist. Join us as we dive into the raw realities of being in love with someone on the spectrum, someone with neurodiverse patterns, someone who is wired differently than you are, with our expert, Natalie Roberts, international coach, award winning mentor for individuals dealing with neurodiversity or couples in relationships not sure where to go from here. Disclaimer: this episode is to validate the unseen, unheard of catastrophes, the trauma that have led up to a syndrome that we don't really talk about, the Cassandra Syndrome. The impact on the neurotypical partner of being in love with someone on the neurodiverse spectrum, formerly known as Asperger's, now known as the autism spectrum disorder. And while the condition exists and we have much respect for the community, now that we're talking about it, it is very important to recognize the impact it has on someone who has gone into a neurotypical ecosystem of marriage being sustainable long term to suddenly being a caregiver, protector because you're not married to an equal. I'm going to be quoting this. And the reason we're having this podcast today with this expert is being able to recognize the power of digital communications and the kindness that it has enabled in bringing together a community of lonely, unheard, unseen people, sometimes suicidal, because that's what the Cassandra syndrome can do to someone, of mushrooming people talking about it anonymously to now actually even using their names and building a whole genre of people who are bonded on trauma. And I'm quoting one of these. If it resonates or if you know of someone who could, seek help from this particular episode, please reach out. I'm quoting: I have known this man for the last 6 years. He proposed we first get engaged. It was the most beautiful time of my life. Fairy tale, everything that I'd imagined, in fact, better. I just couldn't understand how this got so dreamy, so beautiful. Every single moment was detailed, and I remember every single thing being filled with love and like I was his priority. It was all that mattered to him till I didn't. The night we decided to get married, we put the information out on a document, and he walked out tired, exhausted, anxious, refusing to ever come back. And I've not heard from him in the last 3 months. I don't know where he went. I don't know what I did. I literally have no idea, but he left saying it was all my fault. I don't think he can cope with it, but neither can I. I think I'm going to end my life. Unquote. We do not intend to make decisions for anyone. This episode is primarily to shed light on the signs, symptoms, and situations that can arise when with an Asperger's or autism spectrum disorder individual dealing with neurodiversity combined with multiple other syndromes that could possibly make a combination that we're unaware of because the world is not talking about it, which is why we're not better prepared for it. But recognize that while that is reversible, Cassandra syndrome is reversible, and you can make your relationship with a partner on the neurodiverse or the ASD spectrum work. Personal choices, of course, all of them. Does it get easier? I don't know. The expert will tell. The digital communication industries have brought us together enough to make sure that this platform and this genre exists. And it is my responsibility to put it out there so that this information is not restricted. So we're going to talk about it. But please, please, please be mindful. Abuse is not an excuse for ASD. But the first step in recognizing that you're not imagining this is to know that there is more to what meets the eye. We're not all neurotypical. It is not just all of us being the same. A lot of us are wired differently, and neurodiversity is a reality. Natalie Roberts, can I please request you to take on this knowledge podcast that you've built for us today on the Creating Kinder Content podcast? And without any further ado, can I please request you to introduce yourself to my audience in 3 words, firstly, that you think best describe you to begin with?
My 3 words are sparkly, by which I think I mean my vibe. I'm fun. I'm very excitable, I think, and I'm very passionate about things. I'm also a bit of a magpie, which that's a bird that I know has called different things in different places, but like sparkly things, and they like go and pick up things. And I realise I am that for ideas and all sorts of sparkly thoughts and stuff. So that's definitely one word that I think encompasses me and describes me. Another one would be edge dweller, which might be a slightly more unusual one. But I realise I spent a lot of my life trying to fit in, be in the middle of things, or even just be in things. I feel like I really wasn't. And I realise now that actually where I'm most comfortable is on the edge of, like, edge dwelling at edges of things. And I really see the connections. That helps me see more perspectives and see connections between things that often people don't see, and see the intersection between many things. So I'm often got interest and knowledge and stuff about lots of different things and see how they fit together. So maybe see what's the same about things when many people are seeing what's different about them. So I love dwelling at edges, which isn't necessarily a comfortable place for a lot of people, but I love working there and in those spaces as well, and maybe having to go there before other people are. And the other one is an encourager, which I think is one that others have told me I am. That I'm very encouraging and supportive. And want to bring out the best in people, and that's that's definitely a passion of mine, and I think I brought that into my work. So those would be that's me.
I like that. Thank you for sharing that. And you have encouraged me to give you 4 words instead of 3, but you can have it. You've convinced me.
Oh, you're gonna let me have a 4th word?
Oh, you did. You took encourager as well. So there were 3.
Oh, I had, sparkly, edge dweller, and encourager. Yeah, those would be my 3. And I realised that over my life, I lost all of those, and that may be something that we will find ourselves talking about today. But I stopped being sparkly. I was desperate to not be dwelling at edges, and I don't know how encouraging I could be when I wasn't really myself. So I think
We're getting there. We're getting there, starting to get there. But before we actually get there, Natalie, tell me, are these words that were given to you as you were growing up as a child? Is something that your ecosystem when you were younger taught you into being this person? Because I genuinely think that there's always an ecosystem that brings us into being givers or takers. So that is one. Or are these words that you've picked up for yourself on this journey that you've been on, which is beautiful?
Yeah, what a great question. For me, I recognize now that these are who I've always been. So I know that I can see these aspects of myself way back. But no, it is not what I don't feel it is what I that was supported or that was part of me sufficiently through my childhood and into adulthood and later in life. These are things that I've rediscovered and become increasingly comfortable with about myself in the last 10 years. Yeah.
I love that. And I think we're going to, obviously, because you've had such a beautiful long life, which we're very grateful for. And I'm so grateful for the time you've made today. But I think what's going back to what you and I were talking about, which will help us jump into how we've connected. We're digital friends. I found you online, and it's also one of the subjects that I have picked up online as a digital communication specialist. I'm beginning to see that in the past decade or so, there is this isolated but connected community of people who are talking about being neurotypical partners to not knowing what's going on. They're married to the person they love. They don't identify this person the moment engagement happens. The mask comes off, or however they find out, and I think you can probably take us through it. But then they start writing or take to the internet and talk about Cassandra Syndrome, suicidal attempts, not wanting to live a single day any forward, becoming mothers with zero support, and then talking about how everybody around them thinks they've lost it because this person is the perfect person. But what is it about this situation that we're talking about, which is being married into a neurodiverse relationship? And what is it from a partner perspective that we don't know about unless we're in it? Take over, please.
So I have been married to my husband Pete for 25 years. We've been together a few years longer than that. And we have 3 children together. I met Pete. I met him at dancing. We were both going to some dance classes, and we got together, and we very swiftly were living together. And then we got married within a couple of years, and then we had children relatively quickly. He already had a son from a previous relationship. Anyway, over the next 15 years, so we're talking relatively quite long periods of time, there were challenges that we just couldn't get to the bottom of, or I couldn't get to the bottom of, repeating issues that I just couldn't resolve. Fast forward 15 years, we discovered that we were in a neurodiverse relationship. So Pete discovered through various reasons that he's autistic, and I sort of landed in neurodiversity and thought, oh well, great, now we've got the answer to what's all been the problem. And I also started reading about myself, and at the time I identified, very new into all this information, as neurotypical and Pete as autistic, or Asperger's at the time, and there's still all these words floating about, but typically now autistic. And I started to unravel a lot of things and but from what I was reading at the time, recognize symptoms of Cassandra syndrome, which is a reaction to a situation we haven't known we're in, and was like, oh my gosh, this is me, and everything's kind of tumbled from there, really. This new information, this new awareness about how different we are as people, having thought that we were roughly the same people, having the same experience of life, and realizing that we're extremely different people, very different people, and that's created a lot of struggles to not realize that. And to your point about people maybe having a very different experience at home or with a person than other people see, that was definitely also the case for me. And I found it particularly, it did feel very invalidating, because I would often take my experience of what was happening for me in my life, in my relationship to friends or to family or other people, and generally the response would be, oh, I don't think he's like that, or that's just not who they're seeing. Yeah, it's not who they're seeing. And I am somebody, and this is a later awareness for me to have, was that I am somebody who tends to believe other people over myself. So I trust other people's experiences maybe more than my own, and also had no other way to make sense of it. And people would be saying, oh, well, my partner's like that as well. So what I realize is really important for us to be around other people that are in the same situation as us, because it's not, describing it is very challenging. It typically will come across as something very normal or typical in a relationship, when the experience of it in a neurodiverse relationship isn't the same as what people are hearing. So they're hearing it through their own experience, and it's not the same. There is things, and it's very difficult to explain that, which is why it's even sometimes difficult to talk about it now, but it can be very invalidating. So the most important thing is to validate that for anyone who needs to hear it, I think.
Love that. And I'm going to actually request the audience watching to actually take to Google and do some research on ASD, on autism spectrum disorder, previously known as Asperger's, and also neurotypical neurodiversity, because as experts, and she's the expert, I'm the digital communications person picking up content, I would, we will be speaking the language that people within the community are speaking about, because this is also one way of helping them and making sure that they feel validated. But for people who are unaware of it, please go educate yourself. Natalie, what are some of the key identification traits of autism spectrum disorder? I want to go back to the Natalie in a marriage who is trying really hard from the ecosystem of bearing the burden of keeping this relationship together, trying to understand, second guess yourself, being like, no, I don't think I remember it like that, to coming to or landing, like you said, right? Like crash landing into neurodiversity.
Yeah, it was quite fun. Yeah.
Take me through it, please, for the people who are watching you and are probably in a similar situation.
Yeah, and it's, in some ways there is a challenge to this, because what I discovered at the time and what still floats around very much in the internet, and yes, you're totally right, go and do research. I would recommend you read things that are from the last couple of years. If we're reading anything that's more than a couple of years old, it's likely to be reflecting quite
Paranormal.
old, out of date, So this is 10 years ago, and I was arriving into a narrative and a world of neurodiversity that is not, it's not like that now, because we do understand so much more now about the neurodivergent experience. So it's really important that we're reading very recent information about all of this. But my experience, which may reflect people arriving in it initially still, is that, oh great, now I've worked it out, you're the problem, autism is horrendous. And I'm very mindful of saying this, because this is not my truth now, but the fault is there, that is to blame. So we need to sort that out. You're masking, you're not really yourself, you're anxious, do you hear me? Like, it was all a lot of that. So it was traits or lists of traits that you may find online, which are related to social, how people may be socially awkward. They may have very fixed routines, so an inflexibility, avoidant to demands, and not doing things that we're expecting. These are all the kinds of things that we may be reading about, and then it validates what we're experiencing. There's a lot more going on behind all of that I think is really important that I add to the conversation, because that is a very stereotyped description of autism, for example. And you could do the same with ADHD or other neurodivergent presentations of things, where you can go online, find lists which have generally been written by academics, research people, or neurotypical people, and it's important that we're reading the experience of others. That said, the neurotypical experience, or the non-autistic experience, maybe I could call it that, because I now identify as neurodivergent, would be that we're then struggling with those characteristics, or that how someone is in relation to those things, when we're trying to juggle and manage everyday life. As you say, I had 3 children under 10. I was working full time. My husband's working full time. We're building a house. Life basically was trying to function beyond what we could handle. That's the reality of it. That was where I managed to get to eventually, is that we've all been doing life. My husband was 56. It's much later understanding of this for him. And so you spent your whole life and your whole relationship so far without this information, and you've been trying to operate and do everything that everyone else is doing, or society is expecting you to do, and you're doing it beyond what you have capacity for, capability for, interested, like it's all too much. And so everyone is stressed, everyone is using very unhealthy relationship dynamics and tools. We haven't got many better ones, but you can start to see how all of that becomes a huge mess, and our well-being, which is what happened for me, it just deteriorates in all the areas.
Yeah.
So whereas I came into the relationship, positive and pretty good well-being state and all of that, over 15 years with the stress and all this unknown difference that was happening, just created a huge amount of confusion, resentment, anger, just then feeling crazy yourself, like feeling mad, like, because we're invalidating each other all the time. That's not just a one-way thing, and others are invalidating you from outside. So it's very difficult to make sense of your reality.
Yeah.
And that's a very confusing and potentially very hopeless place to find yourself, which many of your listeners may resonate with some of what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, of course. In fact, I think I was going to when we were talking to you, I understand that you obviously arrived and converted your adversity into an asset.
Yeah,
But when I was reading all the comments and doing my research for this podcast, I
yeah,
also came across so many, and I'm every single comment for anyone who is listening to this podcast and is second guessing us. Please know
yeah,
that all these comments are online. They're there for everyone
yeah,
to witness. But I'm
very
going to
common.
actually pick out one of them, which actually sort of triggered me into doing this podcast to start off with, because ideally, within the format, I would say, do you reckon kindness towards others affects your own well-being and happiness? Within a neurotypical world, I would, it would reap a different answer. But when I put this out, and someone reached out to me and they said, would you be able to do this podcast? And I said, sure. And so we opened up like a comment section, and someone actually wrote back when they realized that Natalie Roberts was joining us. She said, thank you so much for seeing me. No one's ever seen me. I'm quoting this quote now.
Mm.
I'm a
Mm.
wife to a husband who denied his ASD until he was diagnosed at
Yes,
53, blaming his ADHD that he was diagnosed and on medication for since
yeah,
he was 6.
yeah,
I've had 2 autistic children with him, which is how I learned I was married to someone with that genetic trait,
yeah,
because more
very
variant.
common.
But I'm going to continue quoting this so that you can help me grow from this. And confirmed this to ourselves. We've been together for 32 years. Before that, it was his bipolar narcissistic father, clinically diagnosed, refused to accept, so did not share. But
Yeah,
thank you for making me feel seen for the first time in my entire life. I honestly think you have saved my life.
yeah, yeah,
Unquote. And as I hold space for this grief, and that's
yeah,
something that I picked up from you, I
yeah,
want you to dive into what is it that we don't know about this woman staying married for reasons traditionally known to us, and what could her life be like? The impact, and I'm saying medically, can you tell us the impact of living, Natalie? Not everybody has that self awareness as you do.
yeah,
I'm also not sure of the level at which your partner is at ASD, but
yeah,
we have done so much research on this one to recognize that ASD combined with multiple other combinations of
yeah,
neurodiversity could sometimes
yeah.
actually turn into ASD narcissism, which could be
Yeah.
fatal. But I'm needing the expert to talk about this.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think those comments are so common. Like, and I think the most important things, we can then feel so lonely. I mean, I think that was one of the overriding thing that I felt most validated in, and it can come up very fast for me, is how lonely it is. It's so lonely, like for such a long time. You just don't think you can find anyone who's experiencing this stuff. So to hear other people talk about it, or to know that there is others that are living lives similar to yours, and even better, that there is let's validate, but let's not stay in that feeling and in what that's like. Let's find that there is hope and a way forward. So we'll get to that bit. But for now, absolutely, let's talk about what the impact is of being in a neurodiverse relationship particularly when that neurodiversity has been unknown. Like that's the really key thing here, is you haven't known that you're navigating any of these things, and maybe it's only coming up. Either your relationship is really, really struggling, and that was us. So we came through the doorway of our relationship was really struggling, kind of finding like last legs kind of thing. And then for virtue of a practitioner that had their own experience of it, was able to say, well, I wonder if it's this. That was just the one statement, and that opened everything up for us as a relationship. And other people are coming to this through the doorway of their children, and then seeing the reflection of their children in themselves or in their partner, and realizing, okay, this is something we're in as a family and a relationship. So the impact that unknown neurodiversity and the stress of not knowing about that can have on you individually. And I'm going to think about it individually and in your relationship. So, and this could be anybody in the relationship. I know we're particularly thinking at the moment about neurotypical partners, but let's go through the list. And anyone listening, just see if you recognize any of these things about yourself. So individually, it would be deteriorating well-being in all areas. So mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, physically, that there's a deterioration in all of those areas. You're typically experiencing anger, resentment, grief, and anxiety in various forms. Maybe you're just feeling like you're surviving life, just getting through it, not thriving, just got to get through it each day. Often there's a very distorted sense of self. And what I mean by that is the typical phrase we'll hear is, I don't know who I am anymore. Yeah. Or a version of something that sounds like that. I don't know, I've lost myself, you know? Social isolation, very common, potentially now disconnected from family and friends. So you might recognize that. Loss of confidence, direction and purpose in your life. Like don't really I've certainly recognized, I recognized all of these things in myself 10 years ago. This is absolutely, I could have gone tick, 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 tick. Questioning your sanity, like thinking there's something wrong with you and just thinking you're crazy. Yeah. Overwhelmed and exhausted, but you may still be functioning. So I was still doing everything that needed to be done, and I was overwhelmed, exhausted, underwhelmed, burned out. So you may be doing all the things, your partner may be doing all the things, but individually and relationally, there's nothing left. You're all on reserves, or not that.
Out of reserves, yeah.
Out of reserves, even. You've used everything up that you have to give, okay? And then the impact of all of this on your relationship experience may include disconnection, blame and judgment, or guilt and shame. So if you recognize I'm in the territory, I just realize we don't want to show up like that. I realize I'm judging all the time. It's really unhealthy stuff. I don't want to feel like that, but I do, and I don't know what to do about it. Actual or perceived control, manipulation and demands. So relationally, we're now in the territory of there is, or it feels like there is, control, manipulation and demands. And it's very important to put the perceived in there, okay? But that's something that feels like that. Invalidating each other's experience, so definitely a sense of invalidation, not feeling seen, heard, that your experience matters. Yeah. Numerous challenges on a daily basis. This isn't like you're just having a bit of a spat or an issue once a month or occasionally. It's literally every day, multiple times a day. I'll hear a lot about a hamster wheel of unresolved issues. So you might be able to name lots, or I had about 3 massive ones that I just felt for years and years we were going round and round and round, and I could not find any way to deal with them. So you feel like you're on a hamster wheel of issues that you can't get off. They're often old and unresolved, impacting your children and your family. So that starts to be the next step, is now you're noticing that your children aren't okay, or your family is disconnected and not working now. And so it's all starting to impact further than you and your partner. And basically life together is feeling more and more difficult and unsustainable. And therefore we're starting to feel really hopeless and powerless to change anything about it. Yeah, so that's a very long list to share, but I think it's such a useful list for people to know. This is the extent of this, and it sounds very dramatic because it is. That's how we validate this, is by being able to share a list like that and being able to say, if this is you, we see you, we get it, I totally get it, we understand, and let's have some different perspectives, thinking, so that we can figure some of it out.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I love how clear you've been on this. And it's so important. And I'm hoping that people can actually go back and put these bullets together. And of course, putting out a disclaimer, let's please be a little bit more sensitive about how we approach this. And let's not be frivolous about saying, oh, you're showing one trait and now you're ASD, because it is. And we wish it was simpler, but it's not. A concern at hand, because it's unknown to us and we're all still learning. But I think what Natalie was saying, I'm just going to validate her experience, which is also online through these quotes, because I have found them under your videos actually. One of them is, and I say this out loud because these are people who are not experts. And I say they're not experts because also Natalie will confirm, asking for a diagnosis is key in autism spectrum disorder, because you don't just get it. Even if you're going through therapy, even if you're in relationship counseling, it's not something people will come and offer, because it's one of those conditions that you have to seek diagnosis for, ask diagnosis for, and sometimes even after that people don't accept it because there is shame, or our ecosystem doesn't
So
allow
much,
acceptance
still
of it.
so much. Yes.
There are
Yeah.
people in that relationship that quote, there are two of these, one of them is really long, but it's beyond exhausting. Burnout is always hovering. For me, it feels like I don't matter because only his ASD brain matters. I can never be myself, ever. He is always right. I am always wrong. There's no compromise, no middle ground. I don't know who I am. No color, only black and white. I must adapt, adapt, and adapt, and on and on. Burnout is always hovering. I don't know how long I can do this. And the second one actually is pointing out to the medical symptoms, where she talks about, I have high cortisol, high LDL or IDL, pain in hands, I'm permanently palpitating, numb, I don't have memory, I'm always scared, exhausting raising two kids alone because he's always not around because he is anxious. He is just clueless, but does a very high paying job because he's bloody damn good at it. I feel stuck. Natalie, as the expert, for people who are writing these comments, what role do you think can we now adapt, as people were talking about it through digital technology, the
Yeah.
impact kindness can have in fostering the sense of community and connection that we have now built through this platform on an interpersonal space? Because I think as an expert, you could probably guide us into how to navigate this within this traditional neurotypical expectation of marriage that we're stuck in.
Mm.
That, and number two, please tell me before we actually get into the solutions, why does this always come out in this one relationship? Why are people not being able to diagnose this outside a romantic relationship?
Um, well, I think they are more and more. I think more friendships, maybe, and more work relationships are acknowledging and noticing these things because, again, the expectations are revealing some of these things in the workplace, and it is becoming more aware. We're becoming more aware of it. And also there are many more autistic ADHD advocates as well who are sharing their own experiences and breaking down barriers of stigma. So I think we're all becoming more enlightened and illuminated about these things. I think you've asked a lot of things in your questions. I think in terms of kindness, and I'm going to focus particularly on what you're saying about taking, say, the person that had written what you said. For me, the kindness, I had spent so long doing what I thought was kind for other people, and the one direction I had not been bringing kindness was to myself. So you're right, we hit also very quickly when we get into this new land of neurodiversity. And I obviously think it felt like that to me. Oh my God, this is whole new land. I didn't even know this was existing, and it's only got bigger and wider. It's always been there. It's just we're seeing more of it now, seeing more of the territory that's always been there. But it was very much about, now you know this about Pete, you will now need to accommodate this and do this and. Well, I was very aware of how much I had already been accommodating in my relationship, because that is one of my strategies to handle the relationship. I'm a go very quickly to accommodating, because I see a lot of perspectives and I want to help, and I'm encouraging, like to the first question we asked me. So I use all those gifts. But what it means is I give so much of myself that I burn out, and I haven't got any other ways to deal with that. So one of the biggest lessons for me, first of all, and it's really important, this is what, do a lot of this in my work as a coach, is to let people know that there are accommodations we need to make to difference. Like, we'd all agree with that, right? We do it in all sorts of other differences between people, and we might be doing it in our relationship if we're navigating other differences with each other, like cultural differences, like if somebody's from a different country, or they've got another medical condition, or a different way of learning or like other things. So we do know about this, but these particular differences we don't have particular awareness of. So what we need to do most of all is we need to recover first. So we need to recover from the stress and the impact of all of this first. And that's why I really emphasize the first step is to direct kindness to yourself to recover. And that isn't an easy task because we're still in it, right? And life's happening. But to bring that kindness to ourselves, and that is, it's not to it's to sort of reverse everything. It's like reverse our way out of the certain amount of accommodating and changing ourselves, because that's what we hear is we're hearing, oh, I've got to change myself even more. And it's not that. We've changed ourselves in quite unhealthy ways, and we need to reverse that. So to me, that's the biggest thing, is to get our capacity back. So to recover from that burnout, that exhaustion, to not being yourself. We've often given up a lot of ourselves. So the first step for me was to find my sparkle. I'd given it all away. I couldn't do it anymore. So I needed to find that. And when we've recovered, then we can re-engage with a healthier level, healthier compassion, because compassion and kindness, two of the ingredients are capacity and boundaries. And I had no capacity left, and I did not know how to do healthy boundaries. So if we can learn some of these ingredients first, then so we deal with the individual impact of all of this, then we can turn our attention to the relationship and then bring compassion to a partner who does struggle with some things or is finding something, but we can then be the really kind version of ourselves who is good at that, and we now have resources to do that to the level we can. Yeah. And then make decisions about the relationship if we need to, about whether it's for us or not for us, depending on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because we can be curious then. Like, we can be curious about someone's experience if we've got capacity. But if we're resentful, burnt out, and are feeling really rubbish about it all, and someone has said, you've got to be compassionate and you've got to accept what this is.
Yeah.
I'm like, I could, no, I can't do that. That's the last thing I feel like doing right now, because you don't understand what impact this has had. So that's why it's really important that for neurotypical partners or people non-autistic partners, or the partner that's recognizing this impact, is that we're not. You may hear those messages. You've got to accept it, and you've got to have compassion, and you've got to accommodate it. It's definitely a yes when you are okay yourself first. Yeah. Does that make sense?
No, fair enough. No, of course. And I think really interesting that you started off by saying it is getting better now, recognition, because there are ADHD and autism ambassadors, and it's great that we're now being able to have open, safe spaces for people to step up and say, okay, this is looking like a problem. But I think one of the reasons that we're also having this conversation is that we don't have Cassandra Syndrome ambassadors, because by the time they realize what has happened to them, we've unfortunately lost them to multiple, they've lost their sparkle, they've lost their voice, they've lost family, finances, all of that. And I don't think we're talking about that enough. So I think hopefully this one will change it. But I think we should have started this at the start. But from what I have learned, would you be able to quickly guide my audience into recognizing what is different in the wiring between someone who has ASD and someone who is neurotypical? Because from what I have learned is normal people, a neurotypical person would probably have multiple interests, and this is one of the easiest ways to explain it. Would probably have occupational, occasional interests, hobbies, friends, family, religious, spiritual, whatever, all those kind of interests. So multiple eggs in multiple baskets. And more often than not, one of the characteristic traits that sort of steps out for people with neurodiversity, or specifically ASD, is that they have a priority interest. And so it more often than not, research suggests, and this is research, you could tell me, is occupational because it's routine and it's got structure and it's accountable, and they can measure it up, unless they're going and seeking a partner, and within that space, because the ecosystem that we live in, we're constantly reminding each other that you're incomplete without having found your partner.
Yeah.
All of that. And so they do make the partner search priority task, and when they have it, plot twist, and they're back to work. Now that is what I know about research.
Yeah.
Can you share your insights into it?
Yeah, so again, so much in your question to potentially unpack. So in terms of say a characteristic of somebody being singularly focused or having a particular interest or hobby versus having lots, for me that can be often a difference in relationships per se. And again, maybe it's more of a difference. It's just more about the extent of difference. Like I'm going to just talk really briefly about what I call the seesaw of difference, because I think it's a helpful thing to bring to the conversation. So in a typical relationship, maybe where we're not, or we don't think we're navigating neurodiversity as an additional layer to the relationship, I often think about a little seesaw, and I don't know how you'll do it, but here we have, like, in the playground, little children, they're on something where they both sit on the end and it's going up and down like this. And if you're listening, you have to just imagine what I'm talking about. But you've got a little something where you're sitting either end of something and it's going up and down with each person on the end. If you're in a more typical relationship, let's just say, outside of neurodiversity, you are navigating difference, because we're all different people, right? We're all different. So, but when you hit issues or you're just living side by side, those differences maybe not that huge. So you go up and down on this seesaw a little bit, but it's not too much of a jiggle, right? It's not too uncomfortable, and you kind of rub along with each other and it gets there. Doesn't necessarily mean it's great, and it doesn't always stay together, and it's not always happy, but maybe you're at like 5 or 6 out of 10. It's kind of okay, we'll keep going. But what I've often thought is realizing that I'm in a relationship where Pete and I are, it's like we're on the most enormous seesaw. Like I'm only showing on the screen because that's the size of the screen. If I was with you, I'd probably take my hands like as far as they can't see each other.
Circle it, yeah.
But now we're on a seesaw that's much bigger, okay? So because the degree of difference between us on any number of different things is very different. So now if we're doing day-to-day life, or we're navigating a problem or an issue comes up, we're now doing a seesaw that's like this. And so the wobble or the impact of that on our daily life, on communication, on trying to talk about it, especially when we haven't realized we're different or that we're having a different experience, it's humongous. And then you multiply that up and up and up over however many years. This is what is starting to create the problem. So if you've got somebody here with a very more singular focused personality, and you could have that here, but it's not so specific, but here it's really very big difference. And I'm somebody who's loads of things all the time. That's me. And then Pete's much more one thing on it, and that's what I'm concentrating on. And I'm like 3 kids, job, lots of interest, lots of like variety. Doesn't like variety, so very different. And so how do you do life when you're that different? It's a different way of answering your question. I realize that.
No. I think it's the right way of answering the question when you're in it. And clinically, for everybody who's watching, please go out and seek information on autism spectrum disorder. And while there are clinical diagnoses, like Natalie mentioned, there are a lot of content that you'll have to go back into and recognize that is probably old and redundant and doesn't make sense. There are also scientific ways of saying, to be able to recognize right from the start of a person's or a child's life, you could probably have indicators of vitamin D levels. They've suggested could be lower when on autism spectrum disorders. So your medical reports would say so. Your palm lines are not as developed as someone on a neurotypical edge line. night sweats, nightmares, dreams, seizures, memory patterns, remembering things right from the day you were born, multiple childhood patterns, because then those do become your special traits also as you grow up. And so there are scientific ways of proving the wiring and the neurodevelopment pattern being a little bit different, but all of that information is out there. Start looking for signs and be better prepared for the world that we're living in, because if we're not prepared, we will not be able to be more inclusive. Natalie, also before we move on to the next question, I want to also take into consideration, since you've already listed out the points that we need to keep into consideration, what are the symptoms that we're now, like, what are the symptoms that our body is now going to tell us about experiencing nearing Cassandra syndrome?
Yeah, absolutely. So Cassandra syndrome, that collection of symptoms has been called a number of different things by different people over the last 10 years. And it is a collection of symptoms and is a reaction that can develop from experiencing the following set of what I call relational circumstances. Okay, so if I provide this list and see how they resonate for people that are listening. So those relational circumstances might include insufficient social or emotional understanding and reciprocity. So you're not receiving or experiencing sufficient social or emotional understanding from your partner, and there's not a reciprocity of that you would value or you need. Persistent and cumulative mental and emotional stress. So it's usually over a long period. It may start as early, as soon as a few months, but it becomes a persistent stress that it then becomes cumulative over potentially a lot of years. That's certainly our experience. You often are living with inflexibility, which can look like lots of things. But some people are picking up on that. I feel like there's just so much inflexibility going on. There's no room to maneuver with anything. Denial and invalidation of your experience. So that is often either inside of the relationship, may also be from others outside of it. And navigating unknown difference. Yeah, so it's not neurodiversity per se, but it is navigating unknown difference. You haven't known that you're navigating that. So once we know about these symptoms, we know that we're in this reaction, and we now neurodiversity is now known to us that this is navigable and it is reversible, and we can do something about it.
No, I love that. And I also do have another question that sort of then stems up for people when they're recognizing these symptoms. I also want you to tell us, as an expert who's been doing this work, there are a lot of people who will go for CBT, behavioral therapy. They'll probably go and seek help from experts. But because, like we said, it's not diagnosable unless asked, a lot of the times we're constantly blanketing it into you have depression, you have anxiety, you are probably burnt out at work. But the traits of ASD, because they've been masking all their lives, they come back home, they're going to be flat, they're fatigued, they're not going to mask anymore. You cannot expect them to move. You probably live with someone, you probably are better with experiences. From someone who is observing this, what are the traits that we're looking at as a potential partner before we sign up for the long haul? Even if we want to help them and be with them, we need to have the tools. And so this is what I'm trying to seek from this question. What are those traits that I'm looking at?
Yeah, I think what you're touching on is somebody's readiness for relationship. And if you're observing somebody masking, or if you're are you meaning people that are aware of these traits, or they're seeing these in someone and wondering
I'm talking about, how like I stumbled upon ASD. I had no idea this could even happen. Like, there are basic things. Everybody comes back home and they're tired. If you've been through trauma, your anxiety and your depression can be taken care of medically. But if you have ASD, because you're so fed up of masking, it becomes a part of your system. So it's not like if you don't have that relationship, your anxiety is going to go. No, your anxiety is going to stay. You can probably get rid of a part of it, but the anxiety stays because there's other experiences that you're having. And so it's not going to be going away medically. And experts are not diagnosing it as ASD because you're not asking for it. So how can we help people diagnose better? And also for people who are looking from afar, diagnose that this could possibly be ASD and not just chronic depression.
Yeah, it's very complex. And I think that the simple you should really answer that question, because it is all mixed in together, I think, as with all of us, who we are, in any given situation, what our energy levels are, what our mental emotional state is. It's all mixed in together. So I think a lot of it is people listening to podcasts like this, or it's reading, and it is something will usually come into people's world, where they are reading or hearing something where they one think, oh well, I wonder if that's what's going on for me. I don't think that it's not easy. It really is not easy to distinguish or pick out, well, this is the autism or ADHD, this is the depression, anxiety, stress stuff, this is their personality, this is, this is what they're masking, and then this is the capacity issue. Like, it's very difficult to do that. So I think that I don't know as an expert quite what my answer is to that, other than that I always come back to focusing on yourself, checking in with yourself, whether this person is available in the relationship, what it is you're experiencing in the relationship, what are the green flags and the red flags to the relationship, so that you can be as informed as you can be. Well, sometimes it isn't that we need to know exactly what any of these things are. They simply are, and they are having an impact on you. And it's that impact that you can do something about. Often we're thinking, well, I need to work all of that out in order that I know what to do. And I think my message would be, we can exert and use a lot of energy trying to work out the other person at the expense of even more energy ourselves. And actually, what we can focus on is the experience we're having with whatever is in front of us, or whoever and however that is looking. And we can make decisions and choices about that are good for us. Particularly if you're still in a dating phase or an early stage relationship, I think that's really important. A lot of people I meet are using an awful lot of energy, mental reading, trying to figure somebody else out. And I would say we can't generally figure out another person.
Yeah.
So we have to know what we're going to do with what's in front of us as ourselves. Yeah.
Yep. And I truly honor you for answering this massive subject that we have at hand, with all the honesty, and trying to bring in as much information as we can to keep it, information level. There's so much more that we need to get into, which is why we're saying, can we please have respect as we move forward with this topic? For everybody watching, we're trying really hard to validate people who've got Cassandra, recognize that you're not imagining this. You are wired differently. There are things that we don't know about because we're not talking about it. And Natalie is perfect example of having lived through the unknown, now
Yes.
coming to the known, and the known is now, it's so saturated because so many people are now coming out and talking about it. And a really good.
Can I do a couple of thoughts, or just clarifying thoughts have come up for me.
Yeah.
One is to do with what are the differences, or what is neurotypical and what is autism or neurodivergent. And I think one of the most useful ways I find it in a sentence to talk about it is that we perceive, learn, and process information and our experience differently. Like, it is that we are experiencing life differently, we are seeing life differently, we're making sense of life differently, we're having a sensory experience that's different, even in the same situation. With two people, we're perceiving it differently, processing the information, the input is different level, we're seeing different things, noticing different things, and therefore we learn, relate, communicate differently. And it's that is often colliding and missing each other. That's, I think, a really helpful way to just kind of encompass what these differences are. And the really helpful point you made about, yes, there's lots of more advocates for the neurodivergent experience now, autism, ADHD, many other different things that are being talked about now. Cassandra and anyone that's experiencing that, I think, yeah, to your point, they're really struggling, many of them.
Natalie, I know I said this was going to be our last question for the Kindness Kickstarts, but it also brings me to that point that we were trying to address on because the internet very loosely uses words now, like narcissism and ADHD, and they're not diagnosed, but we're throwing them around. When exactly, because I'm seeing a lot of like, these are like endless sheets of comments of people saying, I can't do this anymore. When does one know it's time to get out of a relationship? Because this is not your neurotypical marriage. So the shame that comes with, oh my God, my marriage is falling apart. But you can't live here any longer. As an expert, do you have any pointers to tell people how to feel about in a situation, because they're already not in a neurotypical setting. They've suddenly crash landed into a neurodiverse situation.
Yeah. I think the first thing that you're describing, the most important thing you're describing there is how powerless people feel.
Yeah.
And that they don't have any choice. So a lot of people feel like I don't have any choice. I don't have any choice. I have to stay, or I don't have any choice to go because of whatever, or I don't feel like I can choose. Again, the most important thing is to restore our agency about these things. The stay or go question: do I stay? What's bad enough? Like, what's too bad? What should I be tolerating? Lots of things, clues in that about maybe not knowing what are red flags, what is healthy, what's not healthy, and lots of reasons in our past often to be curious about that would mean we might be finding that difficult. Certainly that was true for me. I think the other thing is that generally at this point, with all this impact that we've talked about, we are all in a very deep stress reactions, really reaction, not even really a conscious response, they're just reactionary. And that is there's a lot of research that says don't make any decisions in that mode. Like, don't move house, don't change your job, like get yourself into a better place and then make a healthy choice. And I agree with that. That doesn't mean to stay in unsafe, dangerous situations.
Yeah.
But often, and we know this from research with anyone that maybe has been in a relationship that has included domestic abuse or violence or any of those kinds of things, that people's capacity to leave or ability to leave is very low often. And it takes often multiple times of doing that because it's too scary and it doesn't seem right. So again, that's back to us and internally, what's going on for us that makes that feel like a really scary decision. So I really support people to navigate this question by breaking it down into some smaller pieces so that it's not that big, scary question that comes with a lot of shame, individually, emotionally, family, culturally, all kinds of things, religious things attached to that as well. And again, focusing on recovery and finding ways potentially where you're still in it that you can start to create more safety and some boundaries and some space, because that's what we're sort of thinking, maybe I need to leave is because I need some space. But if you've got young children and you've been in this for some time and you're locked into housing and kids and all like that just wasn't really a reality for me, even though I could look at it and go, this impact isn't good for me, certainly now impacting my children. And that was a scary thought because my children were coming up to nearly their teens and I was thinking, what have they been in? You know, this is not good at all. I was like thinking I need to get them out as soon as possible. But that wasn't a reality that I could just hop into, not just because, not anything necessarily even to financially or anything. It's too scary. I couldn't even think about doing that. So it's really important that we have support. That's where I think when these things feel so big and scary is we need to make it smaller, safer, slower, not like as long as we move, like slow it down a bit because we're often really in big panic. So slow it down and get support so that you can use some interim questions that we talk about in the work I do as a coach that help you get your sparkle back or be you and be in some healthy stuff, feel healthier about yourself, and then you're in a much stronger and better position to look at what's in front of you and make a decision about whether this is the relationship for me or not the relationship for me. So it's creating a bit of space first to recover and see what's been going on, and then make a decision and find choice again. Because getting your choice and your power back is massive in this, I think. Because and some people, if we do just leave quickly, we can't handle that. So that's why we end up coming back. So we have to do it more gradually than that, and we have to work out, how do I still handle life? This is the thing, is massive. Is lots of people just think, I just have to leave because I can't recover unless I leave. I can't recover if I'm in it. And I needed to find the way to recover myself inside of it, and you can. It is challenging, and you can do it. Yeah.
That's a great expert piece of information. And like we started off the podcast with the intent, I believe, the number one thing in recognition of what your decision needs to be, first have the information, which is what we're doing here. We're validating that what you're experiencing, whether it's being lonely, whether it's feeling unheard, unseen, having a whole plot twist thrown at you. It's all valid, but you're not alone. There is help now. There are experts like Natalie out there, and I'm going to put her details in the description where you can actually reach out to her and seek help. But let's also not use ASD loosely. We're still navigating our way. We're trying to build a world where we're all accommodating of what there is. But also, I think, to summarize, take away the shame in wanting to walk out of a neurotypical, neurodiverse coming together, because when you don't know, you can't take it on you. But it is not a partnership of equals, because you are wired differently. And if that's what you're looking for, please take away the stigma, allow people to live their lives peacefully. And number three, please, please, please seek out an expert on when you're getting into a relationship and you start feeling like something doesn't meet the eye. Please be more wary of the relationships that we're surrounded by, because there are people who are probably diagnosed, are not probably sharing it, who have no idea they have ASD. So you're probably helping them get there. And then there are people who have ASD in combination of multiple other neurodiverse situations that can sometimes work, because that could be a vulnerability that could help. And then there could be areas of fatalities that you need to watch out for. So please do your research before you sign up for your life. But Natalie, thank you for this. And before we let you go, we're going to jump into your kindness quick starts. Are you ready for quick one-shot answers?
Okay, I'll do my best with somebody who likes
great.
to reflect and think for about half an hour before she answers anything.
No, you've been fantastic. But your first question, are you ready? Should we go?
Go for it.
What is the first word that comes to your mind when I say kindness?
Thoughtful.
If kindness were a superpower, what superpower would you want for it to have on you, and why? Hurry up, Natalie.
I could know. Yeah, just. Oh gosh, I don't know if I can answer that. Oh God, that's not my kind of question. I'm still going back to thoughtfulness. I think I would want to know what would be thoughtful to other people, so that I could work out if I could do that for them or not.
Okay, that's a good one. If your kindness had a color, what color would you want it to be, and why?
Well, I just love everything relatively hot pink, so probably like a nice, bright, juicy pink.
If kindness was food, what sort of food would it be, and why? Give me textures. I need flavors. Explain everything.
Well, right now I think it would be ice cream. There's really lovely ice creams lately, and they felt good to eat. So I think it would feel like a really good, I don't know, raspberry ice cream with a nice chocolate coating.
I like that. Would you rather have the superpower or the ability to make people instantly burst into laughter, or instantly make them feel loved and cared for, and why?
Oh my God, you would want both of those for everyone, surely. Laugh or feel, well, I think the second, feel loved and cared for, because I think if you feel loved and cared for, you probably would do a bit more laughing.
I love that. Now, since you've been an expert on navigating human relationships, and you've been doing such a good job, and your awards confirm that, I have, because this is my podcast and I get to decide, nobody contests that agency, have decided to nominate.
I don't like the unexpected on these kinds of things. Go on, Mallika.
No, it'll get better. I promise. It gets better. It is the kindness podcast after all. I would like to nominate you as my international kindness minister. Now, because it's an international role and it's the kindness minister, you now get to decide and get into details of if you take up this role through your job description, what day or timeline are you going to pick? What are we calling this day or timeline? And what are people doing across the world? And what are people not allowed to do under the agencies of my international kindness minister?
I felt like I need to write a dissertation on it. Like a sentence. I don't do anything in a sentence.
We can make it a dissertation eventually.
So funny, so funny. Okay, so there'll be like I get the right to have like an international day of kindness, and I would be able to say on that day, okay, so I'm definitely not someone who ever says don't do anything, because that's just not me. I'd be curious about, tell me what it is you're wanting to do, and I wonder why you're wanting to do that. I think it would be, interestingly, back to your point about more than meets the eye, I think it would be just encouraging, because that's me, encouraging people to expand their perspectives for the day and to be more open to seeing or the possibility that others are not experiencing life or sensing life or seeing life or processing their environment or their information the same as you. And just to be in that day with that awareness and an openness to being curious about what that is, and even just noticing your own. So I think, because I think it's from that I have learned to have so much more compassion and capacity for how different we are. Quite frankly, with the level of connection we have now through technology, transport, all of these things, we can be connected and meeting with people that are so different to us, and we just don't have the ways to do it. So I think it would be that. I think we could all do with a day where we get some kind of, I would probably have employed somebody to invent some kind of gadget that you put on your head or on your wrist, or maybe, and it just gives you some openness, a bit more than you had, a bit like a trip.
I love it. I love it.
A bit of an openness trip to just be aware that everyone is trying the best they can with the resources they have, and that we have to create more space for how differently we are navigating, seeing, believing, and also what's happened to us. That means that we're in whatever situation we're in, how we are, because everyone has been having a very tough time. We're all, pretty much every human being on the planet, not everyone, some cultures not.
Almost,
the majority now just living in stress. So let's all have a bit more.
What day are we doing this?
Say be more compassionate, but I think we need to be open before we can be that. So
that is great. And what day are we choosing this to be on International Kindness Day?
Probably on my birthday. Let's do it in October. 17th.
Fabulous.
Do it on my birthday. Yeah.
What day is it? What day is it?
17th of October.
We have it. Are we calling it something, or are we just calling it Make Natalie Happy Day? Like something like that.
No, I think, what should we call it? I don't know. It's just, I don't know. Open day. An open day. It's just an open day. That is a little bit more open, hey?
You have it. That is a really good answer, and thank you so much for all that you have poured into us. And while I'm extremely conscious of the time, the energy, the knowledge that you have so honestly shared with us, so that I don't make you feel depleted at this point, this is my moment to pass on the hosting to you and have us either given a feedback on the Creating Kind of Content podcast, or ask me a question so that I can put back into you as well.
I think
easy, okay? Just keep.
Can you ask the question again? Because that's what you just said.
No, so
blame. Yeah, what do I do?
No. So this is going to be
feedback and a question. You see, you've given me two things there, and I couldn't remember either of them. Menopause. I'm just going to put that there for the other women that are listening to this and going.
We will get to that. Okay? We will talk about that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I could only hold one of those thoughts, and then you gave me another one, so then both disappeared. So my feedback is, I've just had a great time. This is definitely sparkly, encouraging, edgy fun. It's just really good. So I'm very happy to do that. Really enjoyed talking to you, just having the opportunity to talk about some things and just bring new information or new awareness about something and the validation, because I think that's the starting point for everything. So I love that was the focus you wanted to have for the podcast episode, is really to validate these experiences and then illuminate, just shed a bit of a light backwards. I often say it's about shedding a bit of a light back down the path you've already been on, to shine a bit of light there and say, look, this is some of what's been going on, but just to shine a light, and then you can go, oh wow, okay, now I know that. Then we can just illuminate the path ahead a little bit and say, look, go like in this direction, there's something else that can happen. So thank you for the opportunity to be able to do that. A question for you. What do you hope for the podcast? Like, who do you want it to reach, and what difference do you want it to be making for people?
Well, this particular podcast, I believe, is out there for everyone who has been living this life in a silo, in an unknown planet of their own. I think the fact that when I learned about it, I was in utter disbelief. I was like, no, this is not possible. It cannot be happening. Because I come from, fortunately, very, very blessed, but I come from a family and a couple that is really equal partnerships. And so I was mistaken, but I thought that maybe this is how the way the world works. Everybody's the same, because I was wearing my rose-colored glasses and I'd like to still keep them on. But when I learned about it, I Googled about it and I reached out to more people and I reached out to more experts, and we've done tons and tons of research. And I think one of the reasons that you're on this is because you're one of the nicest, most balanced expert we found, because a lot of people have been so traumatized by the experience that they have a bias towards either and or. But I genuinely hope that towards the end of this podcast, there is awareness about taking away the shame of being in a neurodiverse relationship as a neurotypical, number one. Because if you don't know, you can't predict the future. So you need to know first. And if Cassandra Syndrome is your normal.
You can predict the future. You probably are, and your predicting is pretty damn rubbish.
Doing
that. So good you're doing it.
But also, if you do recognize any of these symptoms, recognize that Cassandra Syndrome is traumatic. And for family members who recognize it, for people around them who may not even have seen this podcast, but are identifying that the person's lost their sparkle, is not the same, check in on them and please find expertise. Natalie is here with us, that there should be more around you. It is reversible, but please do not sign up for living this life for the rest of your life. There is options out there, and it can get better. So
absolutely can. There is hope and a way forward. There really is. Yeah.
Thank you, Natalie. This is amazing.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to hearing from people if that's useful to them at any point.
I will detail them. But thank you so much for watching, everyone.
Thank you.